All right, folks, we are back. We're going to go ahead and get started. We're going to begin with our next discussion, panel 2A, detention, transfers, bond, and the erosion of due process. This panel will focus on what happens after people are detained. Testimony will speak to detention conditions, transfer processes, lack of legal support, bond issues and denials, and the systemic issues being faced by those detained. Again, each of you all have 5 minutes to present your remarks. We'll have a timer over here on this side of me, so please take a look. The folks that we have speaking today are Sonia Diaz, the founder of Unseen, Melissa Shepard, the directing attorney of Immigrant Defenders Law Center, Matthew Toyama, the managing attorney for the Coalition for Humane Immigrants' Rights, Cal Soto, director of Workers' Rights National Day Labor Organizing Network, and Jennifer Gutierrez from CLUE. So we can go ahead and start with Sonia, if you would kick us off.
Thank you so much, Chair Garza, and I'm happy to be here. My name is Sonia Diaz. I'm a licensed attorney and the founder of Unseen, a research and advocacy initiative. Much of my research is focused on the contours of policy as it relates to the nation's diverse Latino communities. Thanks for allowing me the privilege of testifying on how we can strengthen American democracy by challenging the unjust, unlawful, and ill-designed arrests, detentions, and deportations of our neighbors under the Trump regime. I grew up in Pete Wilson's California in the 1990s. My childhood home is in El Sereno, a historic Mexican-American barrio just east of downtown. On my father's side, I'm a fourth-generation Angelino. My family's roots in the city stretch back more than 100 years to the latter part of the 19th century. And they include very real experiences with this nation's history of expulsion. This history matters because the Trump regime's mass deportation policies are not new. They're part of a long American tradition of expelling Latinos and detaining communities viewed as disposable. During the Great Depression, as many as 2 million Mexicans and Mexican Americans were deported, including thousands of U.S. citizens. Just years later, 120,000 Japanese descendants were incarcerated, most of them citizens. In the decades that followed, Operation Wetback and immigration raids across California normalized racial profiling and mass removals. Growing up, I heard stories of La Migra kidnapping people at bus stops and deporting them to Tijuana. I heard stories of INS agents questioning people on public transit, city streets, and workplaces because they were Latino. For families like mine, including later generation Chicanos, today's enforcement tactics feel painfully familiar. This history matters. Immigration raids were commonplace across Southern California in the 1980s and 1990s. Anti-immigrant hysteria colored the 1990s experience that I share with Stephen Miller, a hate monger who has contributed to ICE's practices of kidnapping and disappearing neighbors. The second Trump regime has significantly reshaped immigration enforcement and detention, bolstered by arrest quotas, military deployments, expanded deportation capacity, and the Supreme Court under Chief Justice Roberts' decisions that weaken protections against racial profiling. This Trump regime has widened enforcement beyond individuals with criminal convictions. Using ICE administrative records, researchers at the UCLA Center for Neighborhood Knowledge and Unseen have been studying this since the raids on Los Angeles last summer. We found that detention increasingly targets non-criminal Latinos. In the first 8 months of the Trump regime, we found that the number of non-criminal Latinos detained increased sixfold from the last months of Biden's administration. Nearly 7 in 10 were detained for more than 15 days. and nearly 60% were transferred out of state, creating multiple economic and cultural and social hardships. Between January 2024, the last year of the Biden administration, and February 2026, the first 13 months of the Trump regime, the number of detainees during the Trump administration was more than 3 times as high as during the Biden administration, 3 times. The number of non-criminal detainees and detainees arrested in the community, like Panel 1A and Panel 1B described, rose to more than 13 times and over 7 times as high as Biden, respectively. These are significant leaps. Nearly 9 in 10 were deported, while only 9% were released back into their communities. My other panelists will describe this mass deportation that is accelerated by detention and a discretion that seeks to expel Latinos and other people who Donald Trump says does not belong. These findings directly contradict claims that enforcement is focused on the worst and worst. And our research shows that today's enforcement regime is once again sweeping up law-abiding Latino neighbors, separating families, and removing people from their communities. History is repeating itself. In the 21st century, we should be able to recognize the warning signs before more generations are subjugated to inhumane treatment and second-class rights. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Ms. Shepard.
Good afternoon. My name is Melissa Shepard, and I'm a Legal Services Director at Immigrant Defenders Law Center, known as IMDEF. For over a decade, IMDEF has defended immigrants from an unjust immigration system through direct representation, legal consultations, education, and impact litigation and advocacy. We've grown into the largest deportation defense law firm in Southern California, and while that scale allowed us to brace for the inevitable mass deportation agenda, nothing could fully prepare our region for the level of devastation inflicted across the 10 counties that we serve. It has taken over 100 rapid response partners, thousands of community supporters, and thousands of clients to fight back against ICE's attempts to rip us apart. Together, we responded when the community members were torn from their homes, cars, jobs, because what happens after the arrests and abductions is far worse. After someone is detained, it can take hours and sometimes days to locate them while they are processed. The ICE detainee locator is notoriously inaccurate, untimely, and fundamentally unreliable. That is by design because the chaos and cruelty is the point for this administration. During that time, people are pressured to sign their own deportation papers, many times in a language that they can't understand. They are not always given access to an attorney, which is why our litigation team has had to take them to court, and one to protect access to counsel at the downtown LA Federal Building. Our clients report that ICE agents routinely deceive them, telling them, if you sign this, you'll get a lawyer, only for those individuals to be deported the very same day. Others face a legal desert after they're transferred out of state, away from their families and lawyers, without any meaningful chance of securing release or defending their case. This is not confusion. It is deliberate, and it's designed to strip people of their rights and fast-track their removal without due process. The harm is compounded when someone has a disability or serious medical condition. Our client Julio was taken from his front yard by ICE agents who threw him to the ground. He was suffering from end-stage kidney failure, and his body was in such a depleted condition that he was sent to the hospital directly after intake. People like Julio end up in a legal black hole, chained to a hospital bed with an agent outside of their door, unable to tell their families or their lawyers where they are. When Julio's family was told he was being released, they found the handcuffs gone, but his unconscious body was intubated due to a stroke that they had not been alerted to. He couldn't return home for weeks, and shortly after, Julio, who was only in his 40s, passed away. IMDEF, Public Counsel, and CHIRLA have taken this administration to court, demanding accountability for the inhumane treatment of people with life-threatening medical conditions who are denied essential care, for individuals forced to endure filthy, unsanitary living conditions, and for those deprived of adequate food and water. and for the countless people subjected to the psychological torment of prolonged solitary confinement. Right now in Adelanto, there are currently over 100 people on a hunger strike to demand basic human dignity. At least 3 of them were taken to solitary confinement for speaking publicly when ICE denies that there's a hunger strike taking place. We received word that last night, in the middle of the night, at least one of those detainees was transferred to a different detention facility. Nearly 50 people have died in ICE custody since this administration resumed its mass deportation agenda. In one public statement, CBP claimed this is the best health care they have received in their entire lives. The same statement went on to encourage detainees to self-deport, saying being in detention is a choice. But let me be clear, detention is not a choice. It's a coercive tool of state power, a terror tactic designed to isolate people, break their resolve, and force them into deportation. The barriers to release have grown more extreme. Bonds are denied even in strong cases. Immigration judges who lack true judicial independence face pressure to deny bond or risk their professional consequences. This is the system that Californians are up against, one that treats human beings as disposable and denies them the most basic necessities. That's why backing down is not an option. My colleagues at IMDEF and I will continue to defend our communities and fight for systemic change, but this work has never belonged to lawyers alone. It belongs to all of us. Resistance alone is not enough. We need the full weight of public investment behind the most vulnerable so that we can rebuild and ensure we not only survive the next few years, but come out making sure it never happens again.
Mr. Toyama?
Hello? Oh,
There you go.
good afternoon. Thank you for the chance to address this panel. My name is Matthew Toyama. I'm the managing attorney of the Removal Defense Unit at the Coalition for Humane Immigrant Rights. We are a direct legal service provider providing defensive immigration legal services to detained and non-detained non-citizens. Also, our unit collaborates with the Los Angeles Raids Response Networks, has provided legal observing at any ICE raids, starting at B18, the transfer point to the downtown Federal Building, as well as we've had clients in the early ICE raids starting back in June 2025, such as the Ambience Apparel raid in the Garment District, and clients all even up to Kern County involved in the CBP Operation Return to Sender with the notorious Chief Bovino. So as my colleague stated, our organizations, legal service providers in Los Angeles, providing immigration legal services, sort of have to act as a de facto public defender system since there's not a right to counsel in immigration court proceedings. And so that's what a lot of our work looks like in providing direct legal services. But you know, the intention of detention is and has always been deterrence, to deter and discourage people from proceeding with their otherwise lawful and viable legal relief, and it is effective and successful, and has always been, was effective under the first Trump administration when I started practicing, and has been ever more so now under the second Trump administration. And you know, what we've seen is, as my colleague stated, just a huge amount of pressure for people to accept voluntary departure, to sign for their self-deportations, paid government incentives to leave the country. You know, it's kind of like an ICE greatest hits list, and the issues go on and on. A lack of release for even considering serious medical conditions. No humanitarian parole as there used to be. So the cruelty and savagery under the second Trump administration has really been marked by the aggression of enforcement, its breadth, its penetration into safe spaces, and the constitutional violations leading to the ICE custody pipeline, again, in ways that just never cease to shock the conscience. We have clients who describe being subjected to chokeholds, their cars being battery rammed by multiple ICE vehicles, trash being thrown on them while they're in custody, and then wanton senselessness that borders on agency waste, on waste of agency resources. And one example I would describe with that is another hospital custody case. Was the UCLA Harbor case, in which, as my colleague also stated, a person was shackled to their hospital bed for days and days, with ICE agents posted outside the door, and a person is already in serious medical condition. So just a complete waste of resources. And then finally, to get to like legally speaking, this administration has been marked by the need for increased recourse to the federal courts for habeas corpus practice, which has actually been a bright spot for success because it's been more successful for securing the release of people from detention. But that also highlights the increased challenge of the work, given that there has been an expansion of mandatory detention, whereby people would otherwise have the possibility for custody review and no longer do. And so if they're outside of the Central District of California and don't have the benefit of prolonged detention bond hearings or lack habeas representation, they lack any custody review mechanism at all, which becomes a vehicle for indefinite detention. And so I would just say that, immigration courts as quasi-judicial forms embedded in executive agencies have never been hospitable places for due process. And it's simply now more important than ever in such a hostile administration to cycle cases out of court and for practitioners to have to be increasingly creative in finding ways to get people released from ICE detention. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Mr. Soto.
Thank you. My name is Cal Soto. I'm the Workers' Rights Director and Staff Attorney at the National Day Labor Organizing Network. We support day laborers organizing for better conditions, day laborers who have been scapegoated and targeted by the current administration. Currently, every week, I drive to the high desert to the Adelanto Immigration Detention Facility about 2 hours away from here, run for profit by the GEO Group. And I sit across from people who've risked everything to get here, many of them fleeing forces this country helped set in motion, and are now locked in a cell for it. They cannot be here today. Detention cuts a person off from everyone who could help them fight their case: family, attorney, worker centers, organizers who know them. People go in confused about their rights and afraid that filing a grievance even will be turned against them. They are often right to be afraid. ICE keeps moving people, prison to prison, as you've already heard, sometimes across state lines, often with no notice. For days, no one can find them, not their family and not their lawyer. I've sat with a family while the so-called detainee locator returned nothing, none of us knowing whether their loved one was in California, Texas, or already deported. This is a documented strategy. The distance isolates them, and the destination decides their judge. It's forum shopping, and you weaken a case without even arguing a single fact. Adelanto is a deadly place. The conditions there are themselves a due process problem. A person held in fear, in pain, and in filth can't actually participate in their own defense. The food provides almost no nutrition. I'm told that medical visits last 60 seconds and end with little more than an over-the-counter pill, whatever the ailment. I've sat with people who have had fractures that went months without any real treatment, filing grievances every day in constant pain before anyone scheduled a surgery. And the punishment for pressing too hard is real. If you speak up, file a grievance, or join a hunger strike, for example, you're sent to solitary confinement or transferred. Moreover, the door out has now been welded shut. Last July, the administration declared by memo that anyone who entered without inspection gets no bond hearing at all. More than 100 federal judges have struck that down, but ICE and the immigration judges who answer to the executive branch, the president, applied it anyway, forcing thousands to argue their claims from inside a cell. For those who still get a hearing, the average bond nationwide is now over $14,000. I've watched judges set bond by negotiating directly with the ICE attorney off the record with no input from defense counsel. When every other door closes, we do have one left, habeas corpus. The federal courts have been the one branch willing to say a person inside Adelanto still has constitutional rights. But the same transfers that move a person to a hostile court also chooses the judge who hears a habeas writ. So this issue still prevails. So I'll close where I started, with the people who are inside these detention centers, specifically in Adelanto. Right now, more than 100 people detained in Adelanto across 3 separate buildings are refusing food because it's the only leverage they have left. In a place built so that almost no one sees what happens inside and no one, seemingly, is ever made to answer for it. 6 people have died in this state's immigration jails this year, 4 of them inside Adelanto. Those deaths belong to all of us. So I want to say it plainly for you and for everyone listening today. In order for us to end this suffering, Adelanto and every other immigration detention camp in this country must close. In the name of the U.S. Constitution, the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, and basic human decency, free them all and shut them down. Thank you.
Ms. Gutierrez.
Yes. I'm the Reverend Jennifer Gutierrez. I'm a United Methodist minister, and I'm also the executive director of CLU, which is Clergy and Laity United for Economic Justice. We do a court accompaniment program. We have over 250 faith leader volunteers that we've trained to go to mass hearings in the immigration courts in LA and Orange County to observe the hearings. Our volunteers has observed children representing themselves in these hearings. We also accompany people to their ICE check-ins so that there's somebody to sit there with the family, or if the family cannot attend those ICE check-ins for obvious reasons, then they're not going there alone, they have somebody to go with them. Part of the reasons we do these programs is because of what's already been shared about people disappearing into the system. So part of our role there is to be able to make a call to the family and say, ICE has taken your loved one, and here are some resources. Otherwise, the person just doesn't come home that evening. The other program that we started, thanks to collaboration with the Immigrant Defenders Law Center, is our Immigrant Bond Fund. So we began, when the raids started at the beginning of June 2025, we began raising money for the bond fund. We have raised $1.5 million so far. I should say we've raised and expended $1.5 million. With that money, we have helped to release 150 people throughout the country. Some of them were detained here in California, others in other locations. Those bonds have ranged from $1,500 to $90,000. The 90,000 bonds we did not pay alone. We collaborated with other bond funds across the nation. But there's no cap on bonds. They can be as high as the immigration judge. It's their discretion. one of the things I would like to say, I just want to tell a story to kind of illustrate the effect of detention and bonds on families. So one of the congregations that we work with had one of their people, he worked at a car wash, his name was Jose, and he went into work one day and there was a raid on the car wash and he was taken by ICE. What is illustrative about this story is that his wife is a U.S. citizen, and her family petition had already been approved. So he not only had a pathway to citizenship, but he was on that pathway. Nevertheless, he spent several months inside Adelanto. He had a health condition. He did not receive medical attention for that health condition. Not only did this affect him and his health, but it created a crisis in his family. His son was a student at UC Riverside, and his schooling suffered because of the stress that this placed on the family. Not only that, but there were so many raids on that particular car wash that that small business shut down. So you can see the kind of rippling effect of our detention system on not just individuals, but their families, and then to entire communities, and then our economy. The other thing I want to say is his wife had to take on a second job because they had lost the income of Jose while he was in detention. And at the same time that she had to take on a second job just to continue paying the rent and the other expenses, she was also trying to afford gas to go out to Adelanto to visit her husband. She was also trying to pay money to put in his commissary because the conditions at Adelanto, the food is spoiled and unedible, a lot of it. So they were trying to put money in his commissary account so that he could afford to eat in a reasonable way. So all of these pressures are placed on families at the same time that they're trying to raise money for bond. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all for your testimony. We have time for a few questions.
I have many questions. So full disclosure, I used to be a work in direct representation, specifically with children detained in ORR facilities, and then I also worked with detained populations, adult populations in Texas. So I think this piece that you all are touching on is really critical. How much of a bond needs to be paid? If somebody gets a $90,000 bond, how much of that bond needs to be paid?
$90,000.
All of it.
Yes, all of it.
Yes. I think that people don't understand that. In the criminal system, if you want to go ahead, please.
Yeah, it's a difference from the criminal system where you pay 10% or a percentage of the bond. An immigration bond, you have to provide the entire amount in order for someone to be released, and it's held for the entire pendency of their case. So a $90,000 bond, like you said, it's $90,000, and it's $90,000 before they can be released.
Yeah, and their case has to terminate before they could get those monies back. Is that correct? Yeah.
Yes.
Go ahead, Mr. Toyama.
Well, also, you have to win the right to even have the privilege to pay the bond. So you have to prove danger and flight risk before they'll even set a bond amount. They may not set one. And then, yes, you need to responsibly attend all your processes to get the money back at the end.
How would you explain the immigration system, the immigration court system, to somebody who doesn't know anything about it? Anyone who wants to?
Well, I think it's really important for people to understand that you are not entitled to an advocate or to a lawyer. This is very different than our criminal courts. The other thing that's important, and this was made mention, is that irrespective of your language capacity, of your intellectual capacity, of your age, you're required to represent yourself. And this is most perverse for people that are minors, whether they're 12 or 18 months or 17 years old, having to navigate the United States federal court system on your own.
I have a couple of questions. I'm sorry.
Go forward.
A couple of questions. When you all say judge, it implies to a lot of folks an independent judiciary. But is that that's not the case with an immigration judge, right? Aren't they part of the very agency that's supposed to be deporting you? And I also know there have been cuts in that area. Can you explain a little bit about the impact that has had on these cases?
I can speak to that a little bit. In the past year that this administration has been around, over 100 immigration judges have lost their jobs. We've predominantly seen that impact around courts where their grant rate might be a little bit higher. For example, the San Francisco Immigration Court has completely shut down now. We fired those immigration judges, and just a week or two ago, they announced 77 new immigration judges, hand-selected, who have a background in some type of enforcement or have worked for one of these agencies in the past.
And in terms of the bonds, you mentioned you've raised and then expended $1.5 million. Are those all your resources? And if so, are you seeking to replenish that fund? And without naming names, but generally, what organizations or individuals will be supportive of something like that?
So within the first, I would say 2 weeks of the raids, we had raised $600,000 from I don't know how many thousands of individuals. So a lot of it is individual donations. We've had some grant support, including from the California Community Foundation. But mostly that's been individual donations or congregations that will do a fundraiser and then contribute it. But yeah, as soon as we get the money in, we pay a bond. We've got a long list of applicants who are waiting for their bonds to be paid. And I would say too, because the immigration courts are so backed up, we don't expect to get this money back anytime soon. We have gotten 3 of that 150. We've gotten 3 bonds back so far.
Have you seen it, and maybe not in your situation, but in perhaps other situations where it would seem to me that perhaps some of these immigration judges would try to find a way to have that bond forfeited in order to impact you adversely? Have you heard about that anywhere else in the country?
So we're very careful not to talk about how much money, I just did, but we try not to say that we have a bunch of money for bonds because we know that will cause the bonds to increase. We also, I'm sorry, can you repeat your question?
Yeah, I guess I'm curious as to whether you've seen any pattern of immigration courts purposely causing folks who have bond to have to be have those bonds revoked without cause, or doing something to impact organizations like yours so that you don't get the money back.
We haven't seen that yet. Our bond fund is relatively new, so we'll see if that happens. What we have seen is that even though we pay a bond, sometimes they can't find the person. This has happened particularly when they're detained in California City. They will try multitudes of excuses, even though the bond has already been paid, they've been cleared for release, but just whoever's there in charge really does not like to release people. So we have seen that where there's a lot of back and forth between the person's attorney and DHS at the facility to even get the person released after the bond is paid.
Thank you.
So I have one question. I mean, some of you talked about the conditions that are folks are experiencing in detention. In many cases, folks are being coerced or deceived into self-deportation. Can you talk a little bit about that? You know, what have you seen from your clients where people who are in detention are being literally bullied or harassed or lied to so that they could self-deport?
I'll quickly answer. I know we all probably have examples of this, but it starts from the moment a person has contact when they're being arrested. For our members, day laborers, I come and visit them, probably the first person they've seen once they've been processed through the downtown processing center here in Los Angeles, where the lights are on 24/7. They provide even less food for the people than they eventually get at Adelanto. No hygiene, no questions of where they can talk to their attorney. It's a black box. So that's where you start. And during that time period, most of our members are asked if they want to sign a voluntary departure. So the pressure exists. Then they're transferred to Adelanto, where they may or may not be able to get in contact with someone depending on how much money they have available to them to pay for communications. They're also constantly being, I would say, lied to, like you said, by deportation officers who pretend as though they're going to be helpful, that they have extra information about their case. People always come to me with faulty information, and almost always it comes from someone they've talked to, the ICE agent that arrested them, or someone along the way that says, oh, I have this special information for you. The food there is demonstrably non-nutritious, and I see it just with my own eyes. Week after week, people deteriorating in front of me, but you don't need that. You can look at the reports of people who are dying and becoming more and more ill, or people we can't even claim died at the detention center, but who died days after they're released. The conditions are horrific. The nutrition is terrible. The medical care is awful. I could only touch on it briefly, but guards tell people if you want to be seen by someone urgently, you have to be passed out on the ground. They tell people to do that, and I've heard it from them as well. And so those conditions there create this pressure. Am I here forever? And they want it to feel like that, as was mentioned by other panelists here, and maybe my only way out is to sign away my rights, without actually even being told what that fully means to them either, and the consequences that could have. So it is a pressure chamber. The courts are an extension of that. We didn't get to touch on this, but they're immigration judges, part of the Department of Justice, not Article 3 under the Constitution, and so are directed by the administration and can be retaliated against themselves, removed. Judges can be removed. So there's so many areas we could get into for a much longer time period to talk about that.
Mr. Toyama, did you want to add?
Yes, I would just add something that we haven't really touched upon yet, that it's the lack of transparency as well for contacting ICE personnel who are responsible for the detainees, the people in their custody. You would think as a federal agency there would be some authoritative, exhaustive list, but there's not, and it's always out of date, and it's like this like guessing game where legal service providers are circulating their best, newest information as to who's running what show at which detention center, California City, Adelanto, and there's a delay in being able to contact somebody responsible for your client. So that's hugely lacking in a government agency. That's a starting point.
One last question, because I know we're running against time, but just on habeas and the accessibility to habeas, if you all would comment, why don't we have a habeas class action to get everyone out of detention? What is habeas for folks that do not know? Just briefly.
Essentially, habeas is us going to the federal district courts to request release for somebody, to demand a bond hearing or request straight release, and that just prolongs the amount of time that somebody finds themselves in detention, because it's a different court that we're having to go to before they're even given the opportunity to have a bond hearing at all.
And they have to be detained for a certain period of time before they can even request it?
In some cases, yes. In other cases, not. So that has been an avenue, but the need for habeas has absolutely skyrocketed, and the number of habeas petitions filed has skyrocketed as well. So the time that it takes to process those has increased, thus prolonging the stay in the detention centers.
Again, just briefly, because you touched on here in California, we have a 6-month timeline that maybe forces a bond hearing that doesn't exist in other circuits, in other jurisdictions. Again, highlighting the really harmful effect of forum shopping being done by DHS, moving people, it really curtails their rights in more ways than one. So yeah, the Rodriguez hearing is here in our circuit and not in others.
Thank you so much for your testimony and for your advocacy.